Hi, my name is Dioguardi, and I'm here today wearing my hat as president of the Sag Harbor Chamber of Commerce. And the first thing I want to do is thank the church and April and Eric for including the Chamber of Commerce in this way. And I also am going to grab this moment to thank April and Eric personally for not only the church, but much closer to my heart for Sag Harbor Cinema, because I will be forever grateful for what they've done for that and for Sag Harbor. So thank you. So I live in Noyak. I've owned a house there for 27 years, and for 20 of those years, there's been an accessory apartment in the upstairs of my house, which I have rented to a local member of the workforce for what I'm told is a reasonable rent. So I'm not only a yes in my backyard, I'm a yes above my head. So I'm really glad to be here, and I am going to let all of you know that if you have affordable housing fatigue in any way, that we've been talking about this for 25 years, that things really do happen because of stuff like today. My job, my full-time job that I actually get paid for versus what I do for the chamber is executive director of the events for the Express News Group. And one of the things we do are these Express sessions, which we've done several on affordable housing. And one of them actually had a meeting between Peter Van Scoya and Robert Calvert, which helped start the 114 property situation that's going on. So that was a conversation that happened after a panel discussion, which is what we're doing right now, is a conversation after a bunch of panel discussions. So things happen at stuff like this, and I can't imagine that something won't come out of this amazing day that has been held here today. So I'm going to now turn it over to Mr. YIMBY, who needs no introduction, especially if you were here this morning, and let him say a few things. And then we want to hear from all of you. Ideas, think out of the box. What do you have questions? What do you want to do? And we're going to let you all talk. So, Michael?
Thanks, Ellen, and thank you for all you do for this community. You are a true champion of all of Sag Harbor, and we're indebted to you, especially for telling us about the great drinks up at the Green Room. Up above the cinema. So yes, and I think we want to capture what maybe you learned today, what you experienced today, what excited you, but also what you're actually going to now do about it that you may not have done prior today. Because it's going to take all of us to take action in order to get this monster under control. And I'm sure I'll get some of this wrong, and there's one person in the room who knows all of this by heart better than any of us. That's Mr. Thiel. But our Peconic region is made up of 5 East End townships, as I've been able to determine, plus the Shinnecock Reservation, right? There are 10 villages, although I did hear 11 once. And there are 41 hamlets on the east end of Long Island. And every village, hamlet, and township needs to participate in community housing in the best way that they can. Now, how do we incentivize them? How do we motivate them? How do we get over the hurdles that's blocking community housing? Another interesting fact about us is that at the time of this writing, and I think that's changed now, Suffolk County has about 1.4 million people in it, and the East End had 140,000. Okay, I think those numbers have changed a little bit. So we have about 10% of the population for Suffolk County, but we have 40% of the land in Suffolk County. So our representation is not commensurate with the amount of the county that we really are responsible for. And thank God we have an assembly person who fights over his weight, but we don't have the representation. And our nearest governing body is in Hapagoo, otherwise known as Hapog. And that's the county, right? Although we did have a successful referendum to create Peconic County, which which was championed by Mr. Thiel several years ago, but that was not allowed to happen. So we don't have a real governing body over the East End to protect our interests or to fight for our interests. And a lot of the people who are up west, you heard it today, oh, you don't need grants. You guys are lucky enough to be out there by the beach, right? You know, what are you complaining about? You know, you live in the fabulous Hamptons. But the fact of the matter is we're the East End, and we do have poverty, and we do have need, and we do have lots of need. We're not everything that you see on the Kardashians. So otherwise, there's been anecdotal things said over the years, and because we don't have our own governing body, we don't have real great data on this, but that Southampton needs 5,000 units, let's say, in order to meet the needs of its population. And I think that number has changed since the pandemic. Let's say East Hampton needs 2,500, okay? Then let's say Shelter Island and the North Fork just need another 2,500. That's 10,000 units that could help us meet the needs of our residents. How do we get there, even with all the inspiring things we saw today, money, ideas, all of that? How do we get there if our zoning has locked shut that from happening on the East End? Now, Katie Casey is here from the East Hampton Town Housing Authority, and an absolutely inspiring meeting that you had there with the All Hands on Housing in East Hampton the other day on Katie. And so, Katie, I wanted to ask you, could somebody give Katie a microphone? One of the things that was said, I think, by Jeremy Samuelson is what normally would take 6 to 7 years to get done because of the process of special exceptions, politicized forms of permitting. East Hampton hopes to get that done in 3 years. How are you going to do that? What's going to be different from the way it currently is?
I'm going to reach back to something you said this morning, your analogy of the 15-bedroom, 15-bath home with parking in a tennis court and a stable and you can do that as of right, but in order to build affordable housing, even a single ADU, accessory dwelling unit, you need a special permission. You need a special permit. So you have to ask for it, and it's in somebody else's control. So that's a major obstacle, and to break up that blockage, you need enabling legislation. One of the beautiful things about the referendum, the language was very carefully crafted up in Albany so that all 5 East End towns can come up with their own formula. What Riverhead needs is not what Shelter Island needs. They have completely different, they're going to go about it their own way, which is a beautiful thing, because that way the people who live in that community can craft the law so that they're going in a direction of their own choosing. So in East Hampton, one of the ways that the town hopes to streamline that process and to break up that blockage, to eliminate that barrier, is to make some of the funds from the Community Housing Fund, according to the plan that East Hampton is working on, many of the grants or loans to access that funding is going to be an administrative process, so you don't have to go to the planning board, you don't have to go to the zoning board, you don't need a special use permit. It's as long as you can tick the boxes and you are completely eligible for that use of those funds, you just go do it. You get your building permit, or you just go right to it without having to beg for it or maybe be at the whim of a different administration. Our current administration is very housing friendly. They've declared that openly, publicly.
All hands on housing.
All hands on housing. So I've been doing housing for almost 25 years now, and I don't want to speak too long, sorry, But for many years, I felt like, Lieutenant Dan up on the masthead. Is that all you got? By myself, howling at the wind. I believe we have everybody's attention now. So it's time to take action. And East Hampton Town has intentionally put that language in so that if it's a conforming use of the funds, go do it without all
Wow.
the rigmarole.
Wow. So that's really great. And it's hard to get our minds around that. So what Katie just said is East Hampton is going to write its enabling legislation to support the Community Housing Fund referendum. And if voted, that they will, in the township, make creating affordable community housing easier in the township of East Hampton. So that's one town. Any other thoughts on what we can do to be able to make it easier or break down some of these barriers that are preventing anything but single-family residences from being built?
I don't have any ideas. I have a question for anybody. I was talking to somebody the other day who was trying to get something built that's a commercial residential zone thing. And he was saying that part of the problem was about sewage, and that the way he was describing it, it was something where sewage was sewage and all of the stuff around it was Suffolk County, and so that the town couldn't even help him out in terms of making his thing happen. And part of his thing was to do some low-income housing or affordable housing, whatever it was called. So there was some weird catch-22 attached to this thing. So I don't know. You want to talk about it, Fred?
That a little bit. And I probably could make the argument that the Suffolk County Sanitary Code is just as much of an impediment to affordable housing as any local zoning code is.
Amen.
And that is not to condemn the intent and purpose of what the sanitary code is for. I talked about earlier how we need to balance all of our interests, including the environment and water quality and all of those things. And the sanitary code recognizes that we get our drinking water from underground aquifers. And it's not like New York City where they've got upstate, they've got the reservoirs and they bring it down. Under our feet is our drinking water, and that sanitary code is designed to protect the drinking water and put in standards for the disposal of sewage, et cetera, so that we don't foul our drinking water. So the sanitary code is there to protect our water, but it also serves as a limitation on affordable housing, because depending on what hydrological zone you're in, the code limits the amount of density that you can have. So, I think part of the solution to that, and that is, to the discussion of you just can't talk about building housing, you have to talk about all of the issues. If you notice, at the same time we're talking about housing, the town of East Hampton is looking about a sewage treatment plant for downtown Montauk. The village of Southampton is looking for a sewage treatment plant. West Hampton Beach is hooking up to a sewage treatment plant. Sag Harbor has one. You could make the argument that the existence of that sewage treatment plant has allowed the village to thrive as much as it has, because it has allowed greater uses than other communities have. Southampton Town is looking for a sewage treatment plant for downtown Hampton Bays. So that infrastructure, we want to keep our drinking water clean. We don't simply want to put all the sewage into the ground. But at the same time that we're talking about what we're talking about today with affordable housing, there's the need for that infrastructure to support it and to make it cost effective. So right now, the sanitary code is a limitation, but I guess my conclusion would be that, we don't want to lessen the standards of protecting our drinking water. It seems like every other week I'm dealing with, some sort of emerging chemical or contaminant or the need to extend water mains. But we need to do what Sag Harbor did in the 1970s, which is to build sewage treatment plants, especially in downtown areas, which are the best places, I think, to concentrate affordable housing. Petya being mentioned before being a model. So, yeah, the sanitary code's an issue. I think the solution is at a time, again, in 1970s, after the Clean Water Act was enacted, the federal government was paying 75% of the cost of doing a sewage treatment plant. The federal government paid for at least 3/4 of the sewage treatment plant that was built in Sag Harbor. The federal government has largely left the field, as we've heard before, but you have the infrastructure money now, which we talked about before. We've got the Environmental Bond Act this year. So I mentioned this before. There's the opportunity to provide funding. The sewage treatment hookup for West Hampton Beach was largely paid for by the state of New York. So I think that needs to be part of this discussion. And that is infrastructure money for sewage treatment, especially in our downtown areas. And that will address some of these limitations on affordable housing. It will also help to protect our drinking water instead of putting, where we do have individual septic systems. I should mention this also, the IA systems, right? Innovative alternative septic systems. Where we can't do septic sewage treatment plants because it's just not cost effective because it's too far away from population density. Utilizing these innovative septic systems that remove nitrogen, also very important. So it all has to fit together. And that is, it's easy to fix the zoning code. It's harder, to find the money to build the infrastructure. So I think Eric's point is well taken, and that is sewage treatment, septic waste removal is a critical part of building and constructing the number of units that we're talking about to meet the need.
But the Suffolk County Health Department has always, in my experience, always been like the wizard behind the curtain, and trying to engage them in an actual conversation and find out, instead of just getting a no from them, it's like, okay, well, how can we work this out, and that's been
just
difficult.
one other point on that too. Typically we purchase a lot of open space and a lot of farmland preservation, open space. Historically, what we would do here is those development rights from those open space parcels, they would just disappear. And a creative use of what towns may want to do is that when they acquire a piece of open space that has development rights on it or sewage treatment credits, to bank them. I don't know if there's anybody here from Shelter Island. Yes. They're looking to bank their rights. And so that is a creative way of marrying land preservation and taking those rights and utilizing them to meet the requirements of the county's sanitary code, because that's what it's about. It's about density. So if you can take density from one place and put it in another, you satisfy the code.
See how complicated this is?
think
I
we
mean,
have a
my
question
hair
over
is
here.
burning right now. I mean, I
we
can't
have a
stand
comment or a
it.
question over here?
It's very complicated. So no
All
wonder
right.
we don't.
So, what is the difference between sewage for hotels, large condominium complexes like the Watch Case, the Waterfront, Harbor's Edge, all of these large complexes that have, are over $1 million a unit, are garnering, they're using our sewage. So why don't we tax them for the density that they are taking up in our sewage by making a high density complex for luxury houses, or units rather? They should be penalized for taking away sewage space that people like me could have an affordable place to live. Like, what's the difference? Like, I hear sewage is a huge reason why we can't go further with affordable housing, but there are new hotels, there's new condo complexes all the time. So where's the difference?
You're right. The affluent also have effluent. And the answer to your question is what I think was what we heard about before, which is the failure of the marketplace. You know, if you're charging $5 million for a unit, or, you know, take the watch case factory here. You know, those units are going for $3-5 million. If you're getting that kind of return, you've got the money to put into the sewage treatment plant, whereas it becomes more of an issue trying to keep housing affordable. But you know, density is an overall issue, but it's the marketplace, I think, that's an issue, and I think that is what, you know, that's the arc we have to try to bend here. And that's why, you know, it takes money. That's why a community housing fund, in my opinion, is so important, because it provides the money to be able to do these things, to make it cost effective, because you need the money to do it. And, you know, the community housing fund and the community preservation fund before it, it is the most progressive tax you're ever going to see. It would make Bernie Sanders blush, okay? Because if you look in the town of Southampton or the town of East Hampton, and you see the amount of money that's getting generated, it's getting generated by people that are paying to buy $10 million houses. There's a rough justice here. We're getting the money, the bulk of the money, whether it's for land preservation and hopefully for housing, are from the very, very wealthy. It's as progressive as a tax as you could think of. And the idea is to take that money so that we can, you know, make our community the kind of balanced community. So, you know, your point is exactly right, and I think, you know, the way we're trying to redress this balance is to take some of the money out of this very overheated real estate market and to plow it back into affordable housing.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Ian Wilder. I'm Executive Director of Long Island Housing Services. We're over 50-year-old civil rights organization focused on fair housing. There's a couple of things I want to say. One is I respectfully disagree that any of this stuff is a market failure. There's an axiom in systems theory. Systems do what they're designed to do. The system is designed to give rich white people a place to put their waste, and poor people and communities of color no place to live. And I'm going to go backwards a little bit, but first I want to use a metaphor. I believe it's from Isabel Wilkerson in the book Caste, where this is the house we inherited, okay, in terms of housing in the United States. We didn't necessarily build this house, but we inherited it. Now, we have a couple of choices, and some of the people who have spoken today have said they're working on great solutions, but their solutions are nowhere near the size what we need. So the choice with our house is, we know that the sink is dripping in the kitchen and there's rot in the wood. We can put wallpaper over the rot and put a pan under the sink, or we can rip out the pipes and rip down the sheetrock. Ripping out the pipes and ripping down the sheetrock requires us to do a real analysis of what happens. We started by saying the first why, but you need what's called the 5 whys when you do systems analysis. You need to go all the way down. The first why is, yes, zoning's a problem. Why is zoning a problem? Because zoning was created to segregate. That's why it was historically created. We talked about FDR. Why is all this a problem? Because the US originally built affordable housing for lower class and middle class families before World War II. During World War II, and it was FDR who did it, money went to white families so they can buy houses, including the veterans that came back, but the veterans of color were denied the ability to use their VA mortgages, and they were put into segregated affordable housing. The system we have is built to keep doing that. The solutions that we have need to keep track of what the problem was in the first place. which is what I was talking to that gentleman with those 2 blue houses he wanted to build. And he should talk to our friend from Harlem about how to do that right, because I don't think he's doing it right, and she's doing it beautifully. So we need to look at a lot of things. And I'm sorry to say, I don't know if our councilman's still here. East Hampton has a rental law. Hi. East Hampton has a rental law. I live in Riverhead. We fought against what Southampton has a rental law, I apologize. Southampton has a rental law where in order to live in a home, you either have to be a family or the functional equivalent, which means they want to know who has dinner at your table, who bought the couch in the living room. That's none of their business. Health and safety, yes, I agree 1,000% health and safety. I don't want fires, I don't want overcrowding, but that's got nothing to do with it. Can we get rid of that law? Because we're telling renters we don't want them here. And I don't see how you can build affordable housing if you're telling people that they can't have, as the gentleman who discussed the national affordable housing said, co-living has always been a part of this country. But that law denies that co-living exists. And it tells renters, you better fit into a very narrow category or else you can't live in our town. So those are the kind of things we need to start doing. Somebody else mentioned residential requirements for getting into affordable housing. That's buying a discrimination suit, and there have been. Have your village attorney look them up. Have them look up Smithtown. Because yes, HUD says you can do it, but they don't say you can't be sued over it. So you better be very careful about who you keep out of your housing. And to me, having residential requirements goes again to the same basis that we had. And what's happening is a lack of affordable housing has always existed. I hate to say it, but it's just hitting your community now. I grew up in Western Suffolk in a blue-collar community in the 70s. And there were illegal apartments everywhere. Affordable housing has always been a problem. Maybe it's moved east, but unless we rip out the underlying structures, we won't solve the problem. We'll be putting patches on it. Now, I appreciate what East Hampton is doing. I appreciate what Sag Harbor is doing. At least they're trying to do actual plans to get at some of the problems, but they have to be aware of things like the racial dimensions when they make those plans. Or we'll find out another axiom of systems theory, which is today's solutions can be tomorrow's problems. So if we don't have awareness and we don't have people at the table who are willing to speak up for these things when these plans are being made, we're going to end up in the same place, because it ends up not only hurting parts of our community, it ends up hurting all of our community. And we shouldn't even be hurting parts of our community, because as Mike says, it's all community. So one last small thing. We keep talking about that we need to worry about the middle. Again, we have a problem, because we think the people at the lower income of the income scale are taken care of, because they have things like housing choice vouchers. Except housing choice vouchers work the way they're supposed to work, which is you're given a piece of paper that most landlords won't take in most of the country. And even on Long Island, my agency sues landlords all the time, even though in Suffolk, and I'm sure our Assemblyman knows this, we've had a source of income discrimination law for over 10 years here. And we still have landlords discriminating based on source of income. And in most of the country, that lower end, and even here, I've talked to Nassau County, and they've told me the vast majority of their housing choice vouchers go unused because the people can't get landlords to accept it. So that lower part, they're not being taken care of either, because the government's abandoned them, and they've abandoned them officially, I think it was in the 90s, with the Faircloth Amendment, where the federal government got out of building a single stitch of affordable housing. And that's another place we need to make a demand. We can't let the federal government get away with it. It's a national problem. They need to get back in the business. Just like the Assemblyman said, they need to get back in the business of infrastructure. They also need to get back in the business of housing. It can be done right. We saw a very beautiful model right here. It can build community, and that's what we need. We need to demand more, and we need to say we need to rip down the walls and rip out the pipes and build from scratch. Thank you.
Tommy John, do you want to address that question about the rental? I mean, I'm just going to take a wild stab here that maybe that has something to do with being a resort community, that we have group rental issues properly? That
It
originally?
absolutely does. In the 1990s, hi everyone, Tommy John Scavone. Ian, you really hit on a lot of points. What we have in the town of Southampton is kind of a curious law that says that 5 unrelated people cannot be living together, and that was to address the share housing issue, not necessarily in this area somewhat, but really in East Quogue and Hampton Bays. There were these rip-roaring wild party houses, and they were a good time. I was there to some of them, truth be told. But really, you would have 36 different people renting a particular home over a summer, and it would happen in various parts of the community. So at that time, I did not do this, that code was put in place. And it really is something that I think could be looked at. But it also kind of lets us know that in this market, in our summer community, that we as a government have to be mindful of how people would use things like accessory apartments. And I believe most of us in this room kind of probably have an agreement on how they should be used: owner-occupied, family, workforce housing. Well, you know what? If you have a unit on your house and you have the opportunity to rent it out for $23,000 for the summer, you might take that opportunity, and then it's incumbent upon the town to chase you down to make sure that that thing is affordable. And it's not necessarily for your vacation in Aspen over the winter that you're renting it out for a high-end luxury rental, right? Because that's not what we want. At least, I don't as an elected official. But thank you, and I'm here to listen, and I appreciate all the comments that I'm hearing today.
Brookhaven has the same law. You can deal with it with short. Brookhaven has the same law. It's not about rentals. You can deal with it with short-term rental laws to solve the same Airbnb problem that everybody's dealing with, where you don't have to look at how people are living together. And you shouldn't punish people who are co-living because of short-term rentals. So you can change the law. I agree with you. Short-term rentals, I don't care about people who can afford $23,000 for a vacation. I care about people who are living in basements and attics that are not safe. And I want them to have a place to live.
Thank you. And you touched on something else that is also pressing our housing stock. We've got about 47,000 housing units throughout the town of Southampton, and we have a pretty active VRBO, industry here in the town of Southampton. We have it in the town, we have it restricted to a 2-week rental. You can rent it for the weekend, but you can't rent it again for another 2 weeks. There have been attempts in the real estate industry to shorten that time period. I've pushed back on that. I really believe that it takes housing rentals for year-round renters out of circulation. So, right, there was something else that you said. You said a lot of things. Okay, anyway, we'll move on. But, hey, code locally, a big deal, right?
Anyone else? Something? Or Michael? You? April?
Just to go on a little bit more about the BNB situation. I mean, what is to prevent someone who did apply for and was able to build accessory housing on their property using their, say, garage or whatever, and then instead of using it for affordable housing, affordable community housing, thank you for teaching me that, how do you prevent them from just running it as a B&B year-round? I mean, how do you check up on that?
That's one of the Franklin, can you help me out? One of the real challenges is we create rules and laws and legislation, and then we don't necessarily have the capacity to for enforcement on a lot of it. So it's complicated, right? So if you have an accessory apartment, if it's not registered as an affordable accessory apartment, you can pretty much do as you wish with it. But if it is registered as an affordable apartment, which is what happens if you do an accessory apartment in the town of Southampton right now, then it is managed by the town of Southampton Housing Authority, and there's checks and balances as to who's living in there. Unless you want to use it for a family member, there has to be checks and balances, which is part of the complicated nature of these types of legislation. The enforcement of it adds a whole nother complicated layer to it. But you know, we all know that there are thousands of unpermitted accessory apartments on the East End right now, right? Which shows the demand for them, not only for family members, not only for local people who are working, but for people to actually make an income from it, right? I mean, Ellen, you said a couple weeks ago that without that accessory apartment, you're not so sure you would still be here now. That's giving you the income to give you and David what you need to be able to stay here. So it's complicated, April. And we have got to grow up and be big boys and girls and sort it out.
We got right here, you were first, and then Tommy John, you can just jump.
Yeah, I was just going to say that to me, when I think about enforcement, I think about creating a cultural enforcement. So what I mean by that is, you know, there's been NIMBYs for so long saying that we shouldn't have this and we shouldn't have that, and that becomes a very accepted part of the narrative. But if we turn it around and say, well, actually the things we don't want are the 15,000 square foot house. We don't want people to be renting out their houses at Airbnb for $200 a night, when in fact it could be used year-round for a rental. You create a culture around what's considered acceptable. So you don't have to enforce on a legal level. Instead, you create a cultural, societal model in which a community says, this is how our community works. How do you pitch that to the community? Well, I think that, you know, the same way that we're talking here today, we're at the like baby steps of how do you do it. You try to change the narrative around. A perfect example is, instead of having all the people who don't want certain things to show up at meetings, the people who do want things to show up at meetings. Like, that already shifts the narrative. I was going to say, what did I learn today? What are the things I want to do? I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to go to every single public whatchamacallit for somebody who wants to build a 20,000 square foot house. I don't care if I'm just the only person in there who says, why are you building a 20,000 square foot house? That to me would be enough.
But
And
there
if
are
you
no
create-
public hearings because you can do that as a
No, but
right.
there are people who list stuff all the time in our newspaper about stuff like that. They do. Yeah, they do. So what I'm trying to say is, if you create enough of an environment in which people, and I hate to say it, but shame does work. It has a really important societal function. If you start to feel like it's really uncomfortable and shameful to say, I built a 15,000 square foot house with a tennis court, with a pool, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when you're surrounded by people who say, you know what, that's kind of gross. Like, we're actually in a position where we have people in our town who need just a regular place to live. You got to get bold, you know what I'm saying? Like, you got to kind of offend people sometimes. Maybe not everybody wants to do it, but I'll do it for you.
Thank you, by the way, councilperson, for being here. Councilperson from Shelter Island. Who's next?
Wait, Tommy over here.
Tommy?
Sure. The question was about, you know, how would we go about policing affordability in accessory apartments, and part of the legislation, thank you, Assemblyman, would go towards administration, and in the town we would have to build out administration to be following up on those leases and whether or not there are affordabilities. Now, whenever you buck the market, you know, there's always side effects. One of the side effects is going to be black market situations. Congratulations, I'm going to rent my house out to you. You're going to cut my lawn all year and you're not going to say a word, and you know, we have this understanding. That's you know, illegal, you know, and really hard to kind of pin down. But there is administrative costs that is included in the legislation, and you know, we would be tracking this, and we would require W-2s and you know, interviews with tenants and spot checks throughout the town.
We got to grow up. Please.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I want to follow up on something that April mentioned, and Ian mentioned, and Tommy mentioned, which is, if I am fortunate enough to have a piece of property right now that I know I would like to build a smaller house to allow me to build an ADU, that would allow me to rent out to a worker for the year, not go after the summer rental, is there any kind of tax incentive for me or not? And I ask that because my home, there was a 30% rise in the tax on my mother's home. Nothing had been done to the property. It was the same property size, the same house. Nothing had happened. I got a 30% rise in my tax. No one else around me did. So that's a good question to the reality.
Barbara, the answer to that, and you'll correct me, Fred, if I'm wrong, is currently there is not. However, it is in the legislation in the town of Sag Harbor, the village of Sag Harbor. It is in the legislation that Assemblyman Thiel has put forth to the state to create or allow the creation of tax abatements for people who are going to create affordable ADUs, apartments, things like that. Same thing, one of the business owners in town said to us recently, yeah, you're going to talk about affordable housing, tell them thanks for my tax increase. I just had to raise the rent in my apartment. So how can we keep it affordable? And we've heard that for years. I expanded my house to create an apartment and they raised my taxes. So abatements are part of the enabling legislation that is coming forth with all of this, both in the village as well as, Assemblyman Thiel just put forth a bill which will allow a $75,000 forgivable loan for people who want to create ADUs on their properties. Now, that's just been submitted, right?
Yeah, I think I sent it in your email. Not only do you have to make them legal and allow for a process where people can easily get the permit for an accessory dwelling unit, you also have to have in place the incentives that will actually get people to do it. Because if it's legal and people still don't think it's worth it to do it, they're not going to do it. And I think it was Katie's email that I saw where, what are the questions that people ask? The first thing is, well, if I build it, will my taxes go up? Will I have to spend money on an IA system and all of that? And I think that's an important part of the equation. So the bill that we're put forward, it'll probably be for next year as far as action goes, but a couple of things. And we kind of took best practices from other parts of the country that have done better than we've done with ADUs. And one is, one of the impediments to ADUs is it's a pretty substantial capital investment to be able to do it in the first place, and it takes time. So, a forgivable loan program where, you incentivize that, up to $75,000 to help with the building of the ADU, which is forgivable if you rent it to somebody on an affordable basis for 10, 20 years, whatever the period is. But also some tax incentives. If you could get, I'm going to use arbitrary numbers, but if you could get $2,500 a month market rent and affordable rent is $1,500, some sort of income tax credit for that loss of income to incentivize you. And the last thing that's in the bill would be as far as property taxes, because you know how reassessment goes here on the East End. And in some towns, they only reassess upon a building permit being issued. So if you go get an ADU, the tax assessor comes and visits. So the bill would provide that any increase in the value of your property due to creating an ADU would be exempt from any increase in tax. So, I think it's those kinds of incentives that are necessary in addition to streamlining the laws on ADUs.
Okay, there was a question right here. You have the microphone, don't you?
Yes, I do. Hi, my name's Anastasia. I'm a newcomer out here, and am only able to be here because my friends have been so generous. So I've been living free with friends for a couple years. But I just want to first say thank you so much for this panel. This whole day has been so informative and so well put together. So really, such a pleasure to get to know who's talking about these issues out here. my past career in the city was working with homeless youth, so I have a certain, interest in housing, not only for myself, but just thinking culturally around these issues. And I think to sort of support both what you said, I think Ian is your name, about sort of stripping down to the bones of the situation. I think that there's a way to take that up as an opportunity, like an exquisite opportunity. Like, yes, we're facing a hardship culturally everywhere, but there's also a lot of possibility within that if we turn towards it with that kind of energy. And so also, like, to Marie's point, like, I understand that the motivational quality of shame, but I would suggest that the more we can bring in a spirit of celebration, of really imagining, like visioning, what if we could start all over, what would it look like? Like, is the Native community represented here? What would they offer to us as guidance? How could we turn this into like a restorative process that really celebrates our capacity in the fullest way, understanding that we may never get there. Like, all of these steps are equally as important. I'm sort of more to support the idea of like, try everything. But that idea that like a radical movement requires a radical fringe that's like pushing hard for the craziest, boldest ideas, because that'll make these ideas seem really palatable, So in terms of radical idea, and I'm sure I'm not the first to think of this, but in the short time that I've been here, I've been living in North Haven, surrounded by these gorgeous properties on the most pristine parcels of waterfront, and watch them sit empty for the entire time. Like, the homeowners obviously have other places to stay, and I take really no issue with that level of abundance, but rather I wonder if there's something creative around required occupancy. Like, even if you were going to be a single person who builds a palatial home, at least you have to stay there for a certain amount of time. And if you aren't going to stay there, somebody gets to. Like, that alone, I wonder just what would that conversation, allow for.
Like you said, fringe sometimes makes the middle look easy, right?
We have over here, we've got somebody.
Hi everybody, my name is Petya. I moved to Sag Harbor about 13, 14 years ago now. I've watched the change. I've watched my peers from around here going. I really love Anastasia's idea, and I really love the shaming them idea. Right now, I'm in real estate, and I will tell you right now, these people don't care. They don't care about how beautiful it would be if we start over, and they don't care about being shamed by us. They care about going out to dinner, spending $1,000, and flying away to Miami. That's what they care about. Now, my question, I really like the idea of incentivizing landlords, but also we need to break the stigma that is around the affordable housing and who needs that, because I do. And my boyfriend and I, we are in this weird in-between. We both have full-time jobs, so we don't really qualify for the affordable housing, but neither one of us can afford to spend $5,000 a month. So we ended up going to Manorville, which is beautiful, but he's from here. His family lives here. They need help. It's not a new story. I am not a unique situation, especially being an immigrant, but it's just really difficult to see what everybody around me, people my age, are going through. And we do need to do something, and I understand it's an incredibly complex issue, and I know there's a lot that have to be done and worked behind the scenes, but there really needs to be some change, and it needs to start with understanding who needs that housing. Because, as I said, I do, my friends do, we work full-time jobs, we are not, going to trash anybody's place, we are not going to destroy your dwelling unit. We just need a place so that you have somebody to serve your food. You have somebody to come and clean your house. you have somebody to do the lawn for you. Like, that's what we need. And a lot of these people have been here for many years. Their families are from here. Their grandparents are from here. They deserve to stay here. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got to wrap this part of it up, but you are all encouraged to keep talking amongst yourselves, and I think there's still more wine and some food over there. So on that beautiful note, and thank you for that, we're going to finish that?
Yeah, we are. Thank you so much for your participation today. You've been here, many of you, all day. Be a YIMBY is all I can say, and if you want to learn how to get more involved, showing up, be in touch with us on Facebook or at our website. Thanks.